And could South Africa lose its Agoa status? So the growing electricity crisis and inflation are some of the impediments getting in the way of economic growth. The South African economy was jump-started after a couple of years battered by the most severe outbreak of COVID-19. Amid the gloomy outlook, a group of high-ranking lawmakers have asked the White House to move this year's Agoa Summit away from South Africa, as they warned that the country looks set to lose its Agoa status. The economic framework is up for renewal in 2025. For more on that story, we are now joined via Zoom by Victor Kgomoeswana, who's an author of Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back. Victor Kgomoeswana now joining us via Zoom. Victor, good morning, and thank you so much for making time for us. What do you make of that letter from Christopher Coons?
Good morning, Aldrin. America can be so hypocritical, man. These guys aren't the signatories of the ICC. Now they are wanting to punish South Africa because it's not observing a warrant of arrest from the ICC, the International Criminal Court. They have not signed the statute. But secondly, I don't think America understands that the world trade order is changing. Yes, Agoa is still a big deal for South Africa and for Africa, but it's not as big a deal as trade with China and Russia combined and India. So I do not know if they believe in what they are doing and what they are saying, and they mean to go ahead with their threats, because to me it sounds like a threat. But if it were, I would rather remind South Africans that even with Agoa, South Africa is still suffering. The chicken farmers or the poultry farmers, the poultry industry is still suffering. We still, as Africa as a whole, are not able to export processed chocolate products or cocoa products because the US still levies lots more taxes on processed cocoa products than it does chocolate. So I'm very worried that America would like to dictate who South Africa should take sides with, what position it would take on issues as sensitive as the war in Russia, when we know that even the move by Ukraine and NATO is not necessarily above board if you consider the Minsk agreement, which led to the breakdown of the USSR. So, Aldrin, if you ask me, I would say maybe losing this Agoa Summit will be a risk worth taking if the US would like to dictate to South Africa what it should do, because if South Africa allows it, it's going to want to dictate to the rest of the African continent. And we know they are doing it because they are worried or salty about losing their position as the superpower to China, and particularly to the BRICS nations. This is not about Russia. This is about China, Aldrin. And the US is trying to fight proxy battles or get South Africa involved in its proxy wars against China. Yeah. South Africa should not allow it. I'm not saying we should be insensitive to the Russian situation, but the President Ramaphosa is trying to mediate. What more does the US want us to do?
Yeah, but considering that, for me, it sounds almost as though that what the US is doing is declaring an economic war, essentially, against South Africa. And if that economic war does follow through, we know that, for instance, 2021, when it comes to Agoa, South Africa benefited around 2.7 billion in some of the exports that actually meet the Agoa criteria. But then a larger part of it was that there was 15.7 billion rands, $15.7 billion worth of exports from South Africa to the US. Would that not hit the agriculture sector really hard if the Agoa status is lost by South Africa?
There will definitely be a loss. There will be a casualty. But if we are talking world trade, Aldrin, in the new world order that's dominated by the BRICS countries, I would say it would be a risk worth taking. I don't even think the US has the will to follow through with this threat, by the way, knowing how they like to play their game. But if it should come to that, losing trade with the US is nothing compared to what you could lose doing business with the BRICS countries. So if I were to do my calculation, I would say you are better off with the BRICS nations than with the US right now, because they will never stop telling you what to do. In fact, superpowers never stop telling you what to do. And if you choose your battles, you have to decide. Trade in this case is a lot more important. And if you look at the history of the growth with China in Africa, it has grown much more exponentially than trade with the US. So in the long run, China will be the largest economy in the world. South Africa will trade more with the BRICS countries than it does with the US. And so I would say although there will be a short-term pain, I don't think we should be allowed, we should allow ourselves to be bullied by the US being told who we should think, how we should think of issues like this. The Russia war is a contentious issue, and the US is not blameless in it in the first place.
Yeah.
So to think the way they do, I don't think it's proper. And if Africa is going to assert itself, this is the time.
If South Africa was to assert itself with its current economic concerns, an economy that is not growing, we have issues around electricity. Sure, you speak about the short-term pain. However, that short-term pain also have an impact on various households.
Yeah, but the solution to our problem is not the US, Aldrin, I can tell you for sure. The solution to our problems is solving the load shedding problem, is getting our economy growing, and those things can happen with or without the US. I'm sorry, I agree. I'm not a happy South African at the moment if we're talking about how the economy is doing. Yeah. But I don't think the magic pill in this case is the US, especially if that magic pill has to be swallowed with a lot of, shall I say, meekness, because they wanting us to go tail between our legs and say, oh, sorry, we made friends with Russia. I don't think they're the magic pill. They themselves are not a growing economy, so it's not as if they're in a different league.
Yeah, and we also note from this statement as well, or this letter rather, from Christopher Coons, is that they are still hell-bent on that South Africa did actually supply armaments to Russia on that Lady R vessel. And we know what happened after the US ambassador mentioned that. We know what happened to the Rand. What should South Africa then be doing right now, considering that there's this letter that has been sent to the Biden administration, a possibility of South Africa losing that AGOA status?
Yeah, it's all about diplomacy, man. International diplomacy means talking, means discussing, means accounting for where you are accountable for international actions. But Lady R's story, the US ambassador just made off-the-cuff statements. I mean, you know that when he spoke, he was heavily criticized for making statements unfounded. The Lady R story is another situation again. But guess what, Aldrin? Let's just talk Turkey here. The US is in no position to talk to any country of the world who it should sell weapons to. This is the country that sold weapons to every country in the world, even to two opposing sides in a single war. The Iran-Iraq war, there are a lot of situations where you have, but I'm not an arms advocate. I'm not advocating supporting Russia militarily, but I'm saying if South America is to talk about what business Africa should be conducting and with whom, they should maybe look at themselves.
Thank you so much for your time, Victor Kgomoeswana there, author of Africa is Open for Business and also Africa Bounces Back.